coming on the air with one of the big questions tonight. What happens now to Alec Murdaugh now that he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison for murdering his wife and son? We're going to bring you the one-on-one interviews our team got with the defense, the star witness for the prosecution. And in our backstory, a local reporter tells us what it's like to report on the fall of a South Carolina dynasty. We're also live on the ground in the thick of those now deadly tornadoes, the major threat to millions of people, and the aftermath of those storms. We'll take you live there. Also breaking tonight, some new details on a health scare for President Biden, what his doctors are saying about a cancer they removed. Plus, in the original, some of the country's top colleges are now giving up the SATs for incoming freshmen. One high school student, hoping it helps her, telling our teams these tests are just pressure around a number. And one big car company is working on a new tech to force you to make car payments. Because if you don't, the car will repo itself. We're going to explain how that'll work. Then why March could be a make or break month at the movies as studios and theaters claw their way back from the pandemic, or try to. That's later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and tonight Alec Murdaugh is spending his first hours behind bars. But this legal fight is far from over. Why? His lawyers say in the next 10 days, they plan to appeal his double life sentence, the sentence he got for murdering his wife, Maggie, and his son, Paul. In the last couple of hours, you see his lawyers here. They say Murdaugh's credibility was unfairly stripped away once the jury heard all the details of his alleged financial crimes. They're telling our Craig Melvin that they don't think Murdaugh really got a fair trial. Listen.
We think that the judge's ruling that let 2.5 weeks of testimony about the financial crimes totally obliterated any chance of them actually considering the lack of evidence, how SLED screwed up the crime scene, all those sorts of things.
So you are seeing here Murdaugh. This is him getting led out of court in handcuffs. He's spending tonight alone in a cell as he goes through processing for about a month to find out which facility he will serve out his term in. And Murdaugh didn't really have anything else to say today in court, except for one thing, that he didn't do it.
This court, but I'm innocent. I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my wife, Maggie, and I would never, under any circumstances, hurt my son, Paul.
It's not an argument that convinced a jury, of course, who convicted in less than 3 hours. Our team on the ground says actually today they spotted 10 jurors sitting in the courtroom, like in the general public area. And we heard from the judge, Judge Newman, who was real clear about what he thought about this. Watch.
To have you come and testify that it was just another ordinary day, that my wife and son and I were out just enjoying life. Not credible, not believable.
This is the first of more than 100 charges that Murdaugh still faces now. He's got a wrongful death lawsuit in the killing of a family housekeeper, drug trafficking, there's fraud, there's a bunch of financial charges. So now will he face justice for those crimes too? Danny Savalas will have our legal breakdown in a second, but I want to start on the ground in Walterboro, South Carolina, where Ellison Barber is outside the courthouse. Ellison, you are fresh off an exclusive one-on-one interview with one of the star witnesses for the prosecution, Dr. Kenneth Kinsey. He talked a lot about how he felt like the jury was very brave to come to this decision. Explain that.
Yeah, Dr. Kinsey was a key part of the prosecution's case. He was someone that was an original witness that spent a lot of time on the stand and then was brought back, one of 3 witnesses who were brought on as rebuttal witnesses after the defense rested their case. One of the last people the jury heard from before they made that incredibly rare but arguably very influential trip to the murder scene, to Moselle, to the family farm. He spent tons of time just going detail by detail, explaining to the jury bullet trajectory. He was a very key counter to the defense's forensic experts' claim that the shooter had to be about 5'2", and therefore it couldn't have been Alec Murdaugh because he is a lot taller than that. He's over 6 feet tall. He explained bullet trajectory to the jury. He went through and gave them very specific, detailed drawings of a diagram showing where every single shell casing was, where Maggie and Paul's bodies were found. He said that this was a difficult case for the jury because there's so much evidence. It's a lot to consider. He is also someone who, like the jury, is from this general area. He is from a city about 40 minutes away from here. He knew of the Murdaugh family prior to this. He said it has been heartbreaking to see a legend, a dynasty like this fall apart. And then he said, but I guess legends fall sometimes. I asked him as we were talking if there was one thing that he thought was really important for people to remember about this trial. I want you to listen to what he told us.
We heard several times in the testimony that Miss Maggie Murdaugh was running away. She was shot as she was running away. And I'm so thankful to Attorney General Wilson for letting me get that in there, because I thought that was very important. The whole trial, she was doing what a mother does. She was running, in my opinion, toward her baby.
There was a lot of talk about the motive. The defense made the case of saying, think to yourself, would a rational person who wanted to get out of trouble for financial worries, other things like that, would a rational person kill their family? That's not a rational thing to do. But when is murder really rational at all? Certainly when it involves family members, loved ones, it is rarely rational. One thing that was so interesting, speaking to Dr. Kinsey, is what happened after the trial. He said the jury actually asked to meet him. We're always trying to understand, what is the jury thinking? What are their emotions here? He said they requested to meet him. He went and met them. And when I said, what did they ask you about? What did they talk about? He said they just wanted to tell me thank you. Hallie.
Ellison Barber live for us there in Walterboro, South Carolina. Ellison, thank you very much. Let's get the legal breakdown from Danny Savalos. First, Danny, gut check us on the prospect of an appeal here, because the defense attorneys are very clear that that is what they plan to do. Do they have a shot?
They have a shot, but it's a long shot. And I'm not even commenting on the actual evidence. All appeals of criminal convictions are long shots. The courts, the appellate courts, give deferential review to the trial court's decisions below. The facts are essentially etched in stone, and they will look at most rulings by the judge for only an abuse of discretion. In other words, did the judge do something that no other judge would have done? They give that deference to a trial court judge. So they will appeal. The appealable issues that it looks like they're going to put at the forefront are the issue of the financial crimes. It'll be an interesting appeal, but not likely to prevail.
There's always like the Monday morning quarterbacking, or in this instance, the Friday night quarterbacking, right? Of like, what happened here? What was the key moment that led the jury to convict? We're not going to know until we hear from more jurors. But the judge alluded to something, a line that was a big headline when Alec Murdaugh said it when he took the stand. Let me play this back and forth from today here with the judge referencing this, something that Murdaugh said about his lies. Listen.
Oh, what tangle web we weave. What did you mean by that?
Meant when I lied, I continue to lie.
And the question is, when will it end?
Now, the defense says it was not a mistake to let Murdaugh testify, but obviously that line stuck with the judge. Seems like it stuck with the jury, too.
Yeah, I can't say that Murdaugh testifying was a mistake, because let's say he hadn't. I still think there was more than enough evidence to convict him. But it could be said that once he took the stand and essentially looked the jury in the eye and said, oh, I'm a massive liar, I don't know what he expected would come from that, because when they go into the deliberation room, why would they believe a word that he said? And of course, the state seized on that, and they made a big point of that in their closing. So I don't necessarily think that that Murdaugh sealed his fate by testifying. His fate may have been sealed by all the other bad things he had done leading up to testifying.
You know, we'll look ahead to what's next, Danny. It's not just the appeal, but there's these other charges that Murdaugh faces, including about the, there's been a lot of talk about other individuals and where Murdaugh stands as it relates to liability there. Help us understand this.
Yeah, Murdaugh's sorrows will now come not in single spies, but in battalions, because now that he is perceived as an easy target, he's already been convicted of a crime. I'll expect that prosecutors will be looking at, well, he already faces charges for more than 100, as you can see there. But there are some other investigations that are going on around the death of his former housekeeper, and some other suspicious things that have happened. So I wouldn't be surprised if those turn into full-fledged investigations and Murdaugh faces even more than the nearly 100 charges that he's already facing, in addition to his murder conviction and his double life sentence running consecutively end to end.
Real quick, Danny, what about those lawsuits? Is there any chance that those, I assume civil, suits, obviously, could end up becoming criminally problematic for Murdoch?
Not problematic in the sense that they won't affect his life one iota in prison. Will they affect whatever assets he has? Maybe, but more than likely, a lot of these folks are never going to get money, even if they get a judgment.
Danny Savalos, thank you very much for that and for all of your work here over the last 6 weeks on this trial. Thank you. We want to make sure that you do not miss more of that really fascinating interview with Craig Melvin and the Murdoch defense team. That's tonight on Dateline, a special report, 9 o'clock Eastern, wherever you watch your local NBC News station. Definitely a must-watch. So listen, we are in the middle of some severe weather, really bad weather in parts of the South tonight. After things got dangerous, 2 people died. Thousands of people have no power. They are in the dark as we speak. Look at this. You can see the effect it's having on some spots already. At least 1 tornado reported in Kentucky today. And the biggest threat tonight in this area, wind gusts that are hurricane force, along with hail, along with tons of rain, just torrential downpours there. You've got Kentucky already in a state of emergency. The governor making that call earlier today. The National Guard, state police are on standby now. The storm's moving to the east tonight after it slammed Texas and Louisiana, with half a dozen reported tornadoes in that area. Buildings totally torn up. You can see the damage that's left behind. And again, the power factor here, right? If the marinas and the houses look like that, how do you think the power lines look? You have hundreds of thousands of people in the dark, with states like Alabama and Tennessee, as you see on our map, getting the worst of it. Morgan Chesky is in Little Elm, Texas, outside Dallas. It wasn't just the tornadoes. There were thunderstorms. There was hail, too. Talk about sort of this storm generally as it moves to the east and the damage that it's left behind.
Yeah, Hallie, if it wasn't tornadoes, as you mentioned, it really was these straight line winds, these hurricane force gusts that tore through North Texas into Louisiana overnight. I'm standing in front of a grocery store that has part of its roof pushed on top of a row of cars because of this fast-moving storm that made its way through here. And this accompanied those half-dozen tornadoes in Texas and Louisiana, not to mention those drenching rains. Unfortunately, this storm definitely not over. We've seen the damage reports in Louisiana, in Alabama, in Kentucky, and it's still churning its way to the east. And I do really want to lean into the fact that officials have said, yes, this system is capable of producing tornadoes, but the people need to be more aware of the fact that even if you're not necessarily in a tornado's path, this powerful wind that is accompanying this storm can also prove deadly. We know that officials are out in some of the damaged paths today trying to confirm whether or not tornadoes were responsible, but at least 1 or 2 deaths in the south have been attributed to winds blowing trees over or collapsing structures on top of individuals there. So this storm, unfortunately, far from over, and it is proving to be not dangerous but deadly over the last 24 hours. Hallie?
And we can see, of course, Morgan, as you have laid out, the damage that it has left behind as well. Morgan Chesky live for us in Little Elm. Morgan, thank you. Here in Washington, we're learning more today about a health scare for President Biden. The president's in-house doctor says that the president had a type of skin cancer that was basically scraped off during his latest visit to the doctor. The White House physician saying that all cancerous tissue was removed. You see it there in that letter, and that there was no further treatment that was needed. Nothing else needed to be done. That same doctor is the one who gave the president a pretty good bill of health after his physical in February, saying, in his words, that President Biden was healthy, vigorous, and fit to successfully execute the duties of the presidency. This all matters, right? Because the president's health, of course, will be a topic of conversation, almost certainly, at least among Republicans, if the president does decide to announce a re-election campaign for 2024. NBC's Hallie Raffa joins us now from outside the White House. And of course, Hallie, the primary thing is like the health of the president, right? Of any president, making sure that that individual is healthy to be in office. Tell us more about what we know about this. I think it's called basal cell carcinoma, right? This type of skin cancer that we're now learning about.
Yeah, Hallie, President Biden's doctor, Dr. Kevin O'Connor, is saying that this skin cancer was removed during that last physical. It was biopsied, and now he says that upon its removal, there is no further treatment required, but the president will still continue to be monitored for further lesions. It's also notable because the First Lady herself also dealt with a skin cancer scare last month, too. She had 2 lesions around her eye area that required surgery to be removed. You talked about those concerns about age. We know that this skin cancer, this specific type, is a very common type of skin cancer. It can occur really in any age. It's just caused by sun exposure. But of course, this comes against the backdrop about these concerns ahead of 2024 about the president's age and his mental and physical fitness to be president and to run for president again. This is not something new for this White House. These are concerns that the president dealt with back in 2020 when he was the oldest candidate on the campaign trail. He's now the oldest president in office, and he would be 86 years old at the end of a second term if he is elected to a second term. So this is a tricky issue for President Biden, for the Biden administration, that they are dealing with by just saying that he is physically fit to do it. And if he is willing to continue doing this work that's both mentally and physically straining, then he should be able to do so. This was actually brought up during an interview he did with ABC last week, where David Muir asked him about the concerns of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, about his age. President Biden saying that those concerns are legitimate, but as far as he takes them, as far as they go in his personal decision on whether to run for 2024, he says he doesn't factor that in because he doesn't feel his age. So no doubt this is something that's going to continue being brought up on the possible 2024 campaign trail if he decides to run again, which is looking more and more likely. We expect that announcement to come sometime in April because really this number is not going anywhere. But the more information we learn from the president's doctor, the more that those fears could be more allayed the further we go on, Hallie.
Hallie, Rafa, thank you very much. It is a tale of two conferences, right, that show just how deep the divide is inside the Republican Party right now, with two groups tonight holding two different events with two wings of the party at the same time. You've got the pro-Trump crowd, speaking generally, over at CPAC up in Maryland. Then there's what you could call the post-Trump crowd, the conservatives wanting to move on from the former president, down at the Club for Growth in Florida. Then there's an even smaller group trying to thread the needle and kind of play both sides. Look at this here, like Nikki Haley. She's one of the people in that both box in our kind of Venn diagram there. She's trying to position herself as a draw for both fans of Donald Trump and non-fans of Donald Trump.
If you're tired of losing, put your trust in a new generation. And if you want to win, not just as a party, but as a country, then stand with me.
So that was heard today at CPAC in Maryland, where the Trumpian style was very much on display, including from Donald Trump Jr., going after Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman, who had a stroke during the midterms. Listen.
I don't know. It's sort of weird that Pennsylvania managed to elect a vegetable. Is it unreasonable for me to expect, as a citizen of the United States of America, to have a United States senator have basic cognitive function?
But down in Florida, the Club for Growth has been pretty open about wanting to get away from kind of the more Trumpian, if you will, tone, with its leader even saying in February the party should be open to another candidate. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is at National Harbor, Maryland, not too far from Washington. It's just over on the other side of the river there, Vaughn. Both of these meetings are of Republicans, right? But you've been doing the vibe check at CPAC there. Talk about the difference, because it's my understanding that when Nikki Haley spoke, it was like a fine reception. It was not a rock star reception. And she's one of these people who is trying to thread the needle between both of these different wings of the party.
Right. Hallie, let's just start at the basic difference of these two functions. One, CPAC, it is very public. The cameras are on. You got to go on a stage and stand in front of hundreds, if not thousands, of grassroots conservatives. And that is exactly what Nikki Haley did. And you said it. It was a friendly reception, but far from enthusiastic, though not markedly cold. Now, when she went out into the hallway, there were some hecklers that were shouting Trump. And the folks here that I talked to have overwhelmingly been supportive of a third attempt at the presidency by Donald Trump here in 2024. And Nikki Haley coming here, yes, she is the one declared major challenger to Trump. This is different, though, because Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, Glenn Youngkin, they didn't show up here. Instead, they went down to West Palm Beach, to Club for Growth, talking to donors, and essentially trying to make the case behind the scenes that there should be a more robust effort to an alternative, and they should be it. As for who else was here, there were allies of Donald Trump, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, who roamed these halls here and over the last week made headlines when she suggested there should be a national divorce between red state states and blue states in this country. I asked her to clarify that, and she did walk it back, suggesting there should be one federal government. But take a listen to a little bit more of her clarification.
What I want to see is a very reduced down version of the federal government. I want to see a lot more power to the states, and I want to see red states ramp it up and really get their policies in place.
Look, Marjorie Taylor Greene is somebody who has tried to, if I may, tone down her rhetoric comparatively to what we were accustomed to the first several years of her national recognition here. I asked her today whether she had talked with Donald Trump about serving as his number 2 the next go around. She told me that her conversations with him are off the record. She would not go any further than that here. But these are the types of individuals, Hallie, that surrounded Donald Trump here, or he will speak tomorrow, but surrounding essentially a very pro-Trump crowd here over the weekend. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz spoke today, Kari Lake. They're setting up for the Ronald Reagan dinner here tonight at CPAC, and Kari Lake is the featured speaker. So that's very much what we've looked at here this weekend in terms of those that have been surrounding themselves ahead of Donald Trump's major speech tomorrow night.
Yeah, Kari Lake, of course, the election-denying candidate who failed to win her race out west. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you. Lots going on in the world of all things GOP. We'll be talking more about it on Meet the Press. I'll see you there on Sunday. Doctors and the CDC tonight are really worried about people landing in emergency rooms all across the country because of this really intense stomach bug that's hitting people super hard.
We are seeing a lot of the stomach flu. A lot of patients and children are coming in with vomiting, diarrhea, and, a bellyache.
The spike in this stomach flu, which is known as Norovirus, you've probably heard of it. You probably know somebody who's dealing with it. It's happening all across the country. More than 17% of tests for it are now coming back positive. Look at that spike. That's double what it was in January. All of it as the CDC is putting out a new warning about more cases of a different stomach bug, an almost untreatable one called Shigella, calling it a serious public health threat. Maggie Vespa is live for us in Chicago. Doesn't sound awesome, Maggie. Doesn't sound super comfortable for the people who are dealing with this. And you just talked to a family that had a very bad experience.
I mean, Hallie, absolute nightmare for this family, right? Like, this is a Chicago area family, a mom, dad, 2 kids. And about 2 weeks ago, within days of each other, they all got norovirus. And I should say, a lot of the details of this story are frankly gross, and we apologize. But that means that they were all vomiting, dealing with diarrhea, fever, the whole 9, again, within days of each other. And key mom, Emily Ferret, and her 2-year-old Levi got sick at the exact same time. Take a listen.
I'm traumatized a little bit. We're texting my husband. I'm like, you need to come home from work. It was so intense. I was like, I don't know how to function right now.
By the way, the husband did come home from work and then he got sick. Emily told us 2 days later. And by the way, Hallie, doctors say that that is both gross and standard. Like, a lot of families are showing up all together at the ER, all of them sick, all of them dehydrated, and all of them just desperate for doctors to help them, Hallie.
But what you are saying, I think, Maggie, is what's so important here, right? Because, listen, families get sick. It happens. It sucks, but it happens. The issue is that people are getting very sick, coming to the ERs, and now there's this sort of alarm bell sounding of like, hey, like, we're seeing a lot of people coming to ERs. The sort of healthcare apparatus, the public health experts in this country want to make sure that ERs are going to be able to handle these people showing up, because you have not just norovirus, but this other thing, Shigella, which is resistant to drugs.
Right. Like, norovirus, as you point out, is nothing new. This is just a really severe spike. Again, the test positivity rate basically doubling in the last month. And doctors basically want people to be really aware of how contagious norovirus is. We'll start with that one. And then also the fact that when they get it, these symptoms can last for days. So look for severe dehydration. But the best way to prevent getting it are things like this. Washing your hands often with soap and water, because, by the way, hand sanitizer, we learned, does not kill norovirus. So that's important. Also, things like preparing your food correctly. If you do get it, think of this. Think of home and hydrate. You want to hydrate, drink lots of water, Pedialyte, things like that. Replacing those electrolytes is great. Stay home when you're sick, and stay home for 2 days after symptoms stop, and then don't make food for others. And then also, the other layer on top of this is, if this isn't bad enough, as you said, now we have to worry about Shigella. The CDC having this alert coming out earlier this week, and basically they say that is a bacteria-based infection, which normally can be treated by antibiotics, but this is the key. They say more and more It is becoming drug resistant. Last year, 5% of cases they called almost untreatable. About 8 years ago, that was never the case. So they're also warning people about that and, again, stressing prevention. Hallie.
Maggie Vespa, thank you very much. We'll look for more of your reporting tonight on NBC Nightly News, tonight 6:30 Eastern Time with Lester Holt. Coming up, President Biden awarding the Medal of Honor today to a Vietnam vet and one of the country's first black Special Forces officers. But why did he have to wait nearly 60 years after he was first nominated? We'll explain next. Plus, Hershey's new Women's Day ad campaign is ending up in boycott calls on social media. We've got those details in the 5 things. President Biden hasn't even officially announced he'll run for re-election, but he's already got his first Democratic challenger if he does. We'll tell you who coming up in the 5 things. But first, we're just learning about the very first Ivy League school, Ivy League college in this country, to leave its test optional admissions policy in place, possibly forever. That means students are not required to submit SAT or ACT scores for admissions. These are a couple of standardized tests that have been a rite of passage and a source of anxiety for students for decades. And now this whole test optional trend is catching on big time. It's our original tonight, and NBC's Emily Aketa has more.
It's college admissions season. High school seniors are eagerly waiting to find out if their application and their standardized test scores were good enough to get them into their dream school.
There is so much pressure around, getting a certain score, getting literally just pressure around a number.
Parisa Verma, among those stressed out seniors. She applied to Columbia University in New York. While Verma took the SATs 3 times, she decided not to submit her scores with her application.
I wasn't exactly satisfied with my scores. The college admissions office also agreed that it wouldn't exactly help my application to submit scores.
1,700 prominent schools, such as Columbia University, suspended requirements for SAT or ACT scores, according to Fair Test, many introducing a temporary change because of the coronavirus pandemic. But test optional policies are proving to have staying power. This week, Columbia University became the first Ivy League school to extend it indefinitely. A decision rooted in the belief that students are dynamic, multifaceted individuals who cannot be defined by any single factor. A day later, William & Mary also suspended testing requirements, following what they call an effective 3-year trial.
The students we admitted with test scores and the students we admitted who did not submit test scores basically had virtually identical freshman retention rates, clearly gave us confidence in knowing that this program was working and our students were prepared.
Advocate for limiting standardized testing, Harry Fader, believes more schools will follow.
They're going to become more reluctant to use standardized tests when there are lots of other indicators of what a student is really like.
But test optional policies raise a big question for students: to submit scores or not. Some students worry they could hurt their chances of getting in or getting a scholarship without test scores.
It's introduced a lot of gray into the process, and that has added some stress to students and parents, and I will say school counselors too, who are trying to provide the best advice.
Janet Godwin is the chief executive of the ACT. She acknowledges standardized tests are only one component of an application, but she says an important one.
Scores like the ACT are important because they are objective. They mean the same thing from one school district to another. They're not as subjective as things like letters of recommendation and other dimensions of a admissions portfolio.
As for Parisa Verma, she hopes the strength of her whole application, her essay, a strong transcript, and extracurriculars will earn her an acceptance letter to Columbia.
I hope that they're able to overlook the fact that I didn't submit a score and instead focus on the parts of my application that I believe represent who I am more wholly than a number would.
Emily is with us now. Emily, it's so interesting here, especially for anybody who knows a high school student, is a high school student, maybe is early in college and had to take the SAT or the ACT or didn't, considering the pandemic is part of what moved this conversation forward about not having these test requirements in place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's not actually a new debate necessarily. It's been a conversation that has been ongoing for years. Wake Forest, for instance, they actually made test scores, submitting them optional more than a decade ago. And other universities and colleges have taken that a step further. UCLA, for instance, they won't even give students the option to submit ACT or SAT test scores. They don't take it into consideration. Proponents say that it helps reduce barriers, especially among low-income students, to gaining a higher education. Think about just how much money goes into sometimes preparing for those kinds of exams. But on the other side, people caution those exams can actually sometimes be a more affordable option or a more affordable way for students to shine in comparison to gaining those extracurricular activities. So a lot of opinions on this, Hallie. Certainly not the last we're going to hear on this conversation.
Emily Aketa, great to have you on for tonight's Original. Thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Attorney General Merrick Garland making a surprise visit to Ukraine today, showing up in Kyiv, meeting with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to reassure him that, yes, America is committed to prosecuting any Russian war crimes. It comes as the U.S. says it's going to send another $400 million in military help to the country. Number 2, the winner of last year's Nobel Peace Prize was just sentenced to 10 years behind bars in Belarus. The human rights activist was convicted of financing protests against the country's dictator, Alexander Lukashenko. The EU and the U.S. have condemned this whole trial as a sham. Number 3, President Biden today awarding the Medal of Honor to one of the first black officers to lead a special forces team in combat. Colonel Paris Davis fought in Vietnam and was nominated for the highest military honor in this country after he risked his life to save his fellow troops after an ambush. Thing is, he had to wait 60 years to get the award after the Army said the paperwork couldn't be found. Number 4, President Biden is not even in the 2024 race officially yet, but already he has a new Democratic challenger in this woman, Marianne Williamson. Yes, she is running for president, she says, again. The author and spiritual advisor says she's going to run as a Democrat, so she would obviously be up against a primary against the president if he decides to run. She previously ran for the nomination in 2020, campaigning around themes of love and big truth. Number 5, there are more calls to boycott Hershey's online. Critics say it's because of the company's International Women's Day Canadian campaign, which features a trans woman on some of its candy bars. It's the latest brand to get a pretty strong and somewhat mixed reaction for advertisers that touches on, or like marketing campaigns that touch on cultural or societal issues. Hershey's is standing by the campaign. When we come back, we are pulling back the curtain on Alec Murdaugh's stunning fall from grace with one South Carolina reporter who followed every single twist and turn. You may have followed him on Twitter. That's in tonight's backstory. Plus, behind on your car payments? Your car might end up driving itself to the impound lot pretty soon. Yeah, that's coming up later this hour. LL Bean's facing a new lawsuit around their really popular bean boots. That's coming up in the local. But first, we're getting some new details from our team about what Alec Murdaugh's life is going to look like now that he's been sentenced to 2 life sentences. Here's the deal. He's going to spend tonight alone in a jail cell at this huge facility in Columbia, South Carolina. He's not going to be allowed to have any visitors for the first few weeks, even though his lawyers came by. He's going to go through a bunch of medical and mental health tests over the next month. That's going to help officials figure out which specific facility he should spend the rest of his life at, which prison. All of it, just an extraordinary fall from grace for somebody who had so much money, so much power. As our Ellison Barber heard from that star prosecution witness she spoke with exclusively. Listen.
It breaks your heart to know that a dynasty, a true, strong legend, a family that were looked upon as legends has ended. But I guess legends end every day.
And to give us more of a sense of who Murdaugh is, what he was in the South Carolina community, what's happening there now, we're going to take you to the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture with a reporter who has seen every minute of this up close, Avery Wilkes, who has been, honestly, a resource for some of the producers on our team because of these so-called Twitter mega threads. That's what he calls them. They hit at all the key moments of the trial, the quotes you got to know on how this really complicated story ends up woven together. Avery is joining us now, the chief investigative reporter for the Post and Courier. Avery, it's great to have you on the show. Thank you. And this segment really is like, how do you make the sausage, so to speak? You were a sports reporter before you were an investigative reporter. And I know you've credited that with like how you've learned to live tweet, especially something as high profile as this, even the little details like the lizards and snakes that ended up in the media room where you had to be. Talk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, I covered University of South Carolina football, baseball, basketball, and women's basketball. Basically all 4 years I was in college. I covered, the fast-talking, gregarious, witty football coach Steve Spurrier for several of those years. And so I think back then I learned the value of live tweeting. And then I, of course, got into news reporting when I graduated college and wanted to try something new. And I found that not many, reporters were doing that. And I wondered why. And I started covering the State House and politics, and I was just basically tweeting nonstop. And I think people are drawn to that. I think Twitter, for all of its flaws, of which there are many, it can be a tool to relate to people and to build credibility and to build a following and to demonstrate to people that journalists are not the enemy of the people. We're normal folks. We're just like you. That's why I throw a lot of humor and pictures of my dog Scoop,
I was gonna say Scoop.
in my feeds as well.
Oh, I'm
yeah,
familiar
Scoop.
with
She's a news
Scoop
hound.
the pup.
It's a journalism name. Yeah, so I use Twitter to relate to people and to build that credibility. Yeah.
It's not just Twitter. We're showing some of the TikToks that you make for the Post and Courier's account, right? I mean, one of the interesting things, we know this because we're in the news business, right? Hours and hours and hours of testimony, hours and hours of tape, more quotes than you could possibly count. And yet, give us a sense of just like, open your MacBook for us or whatever you use, right? How do you boil down this sometimes, frankly, testimony that can be sometimes intentionally repetitive? How do you boil it down into those key moments for your audiences there?
I tend to think of it, how would I explain to my mom or my dad back home in small town Chester, South Carolina, if I was just going to try to boil down 7 or 8 hours of testimony, what would be the first things that I tell them? And that's typically the lead of your story. That's typically, whatever tweet you send that goes the farthest and gets the most reach and most retweets or whatever. I mean, that's just storytelling. You lead with the best stuff. And so that's essentially what I do on the TikToks as well. I do write out a script, a handwritten script. And then, I'll just go out in front of the courthouse about an hour, hour and a half, and I'll look into an iPhone camera. And the first time I screw up and, I might get a few paragraphs in. The second time I get halfway through the script before I screw up. And usually by the fourth or fifth take, I've got it nailed down pat.
One of the things, and you referenced this, you're a South Carolina guy. You went to college there. You mentioned your family lives in South Carolina. You know this state so well. You know communities like Walter Borough well. What is it, do you think, that national outlets might be missing here or not understanding that somebody like you with that South Carolina background gets or knows to hone in on there?
Well, I don't proclaim to be the all-knowing, omniscient reporter on this beat. There's plenty of great, there are plenty of great reporters here from national outlets as well as local. But I mean, I do think the one advantage we get, as local reporters is that we know the players, we know the personalities. I've covered the State House where Dick Harpootlian, the lead defense attorney, is a state senator. We're here all the time. We're going to be here after everyone else is packed up and left. And so I think that helps us with sources, and that helps us with readers as well.
Avery Wilkes, on behalf of Michael Sullivan and Amy Delgado and some other producers on our team, thank you for being on. You have a lot of fans in our newsroom. We really appreciate you coming on to pull back the curtain for us. And by the way, as Avery was filling us in on the backstory there, we have some news in the actual story. Alec Murdaugh, as we've been in this conversation, just arrived now at the Kirkland facility in Columbia, South Carolina, where, as we laid out at the top of this discussion, he is going to be processed, and officials will begin to figure out the process of where he will spend the rest of his life behind bars after that conviction. When we come back here on the show, Florida bloggers who write about state officials might be forced to register with the government soon. We'll tell you what's going on there coming up in the local. Plus, thanks to Netflix, one sport is getting very, very popular in this country, and it's about to make history this weekend. Stay with us. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, some really just graphic and frankly dramatic new video. Look at this, a deadly car crash in Baltimore. This is last month. Did you see that? Police there say they tried to stop a driver in a stolen car, but that driver, you saw it, collided with another car, hit somebody on a sidewalk. They crashed into a building, which, as you see, collapsed on top of them. The driver of that stolen car was taken into custody. Police are still investigating what led up to all of this. Out of our Southern Bureau, a bill just introduced in Florida would make bloggers who write about Governor Ron DeSantis or state legislators have to register with the state. If this thing's passed, these bloggers would also have to report how much money they make and who is paying them that money. Now, this would not apply to newspapers' websites, right? But the governor's office says it is reviewing the bill. Out of our Northeast Bureau, a very Northeast story. A woman from New York is suing LL Bean, saying their so-called waterproof boots are not actually waterproof. She says that's because the zipper isn't waterproof, so neither are the boots, according to court documents. The company's telling our affiliate in Maine, where LL Bean is based, that it doesn't comment on pending litigation. A big car company may be moving toward a high-tech way to punish people who don't make their car payments by having their cars actually repossess themselves, which maybe could help avoid rather unpleasant situations like this one of a car repo gone wrong. Yes, that's right. You've probably seen some of those videos of repos online. We're learning about all this from a patent that Ford has now filed, which has just been made public. It's not like your car would simply drive off all of a sudden if you miss one payment. You'd get some warnings first, like you'd lose your automatic window and seat controls. Then maybe you'd have no more AC. Maybe you couldn't then automatically lock your doors. Next level, right, then it escalates to the car playing this, I'm quoting here, incessant and unpleasant sound every time the owner or the keys are near the car. And if none of that gets you to pay your bill, eventually, in this patent, your car would just drive itself off. It's important to note here, in a statement to NBC News, Ford made it clear they have no plans to actually use this technology right now. They submit patents as a course of business, but it doesn't mean that's like an upcoming product. But just the idea of it is coming at a time when experts say car repossessions in this country are going up because of the current status of the economy. Ron Allen is joining us now. Feels like there's a lot of things that could go wrong in a lot of ways here. Privacy concerns, data concerns, with the caveat that it's not like it's going to become a reality tomorrow. Still really interesting.
But it may become a reality someday soon. This is car companies apparently file tens of thousands of patent requests every year. It's one of the busiest industries, especially in the area of electronic vehicles and self-drive vehicles of the future. And this is an example of all of that, for trying to stake out some territory. And you know, you can do a lot of things with cars remotely now. You can start them. I had a friend whose car was stolen, and she was able to blow the horn in the car once it stopped. So, of course, what could go wrong with all this? Yes, there's data privacy issues to be concerned. What happens if the car company does something to the car and there's an accident that the driver has while they're not paying their bill? There's a lot here, but yes, it could actually happen. It probably will actually happen in some form. Maybe it's just the car moving down the driveway to a place where a tow truck can take it away. It doesn't have to necessarily drive down the street and around the corner to someplace else. But yeah, I mean, it's real. If not today, maybe tomorrow.
I think about so much of this, though. Like, what if it's a mistake? What if you did pay the bill, but the billing message, like, there's just so much to it. But it does sound like Ford has been trying to think through some possible issues. Like, there's an exception to this lockout thing for emergencies, right? Like, that's one part of it, too, that Ford's thought about.
Well, again, they foresee having total control over your car and where it could go, so they could program it so that you would be able to go to the doctor, you could go to a bank, drop the kids off from school, sort of like a geo-fence created around your car that allows you to go certain places at certain times. It's amazing what they think they can do with your car if you don't pay your bills. And this is obviously serious business. So, yeah, it's not going to happen right now. They apply for thousands and thousands of patents, trying to stake out some intellectual property territory. And so pay your car note, because this could be coming.
No joke. Ron Allen, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Speaking of cars, we will speak of F1, right? Perhaps the fastest growing sport in America. These supercars that can get up to like 200 plus miles an hour, 218, with Formula One kicking off its new season in Bahrain with a first for Americans. They're making history here. You see Logan Sargent there. He's 22 years old. He's the first U.S. driver in 7 years. Now, he's racing for a British team, but there is a U.S.-based team, which means this is the very first time we've seen an American driver and American team on the track at the same time in decades. And the U.S. is kind of at the center of the F1 universe this year. We've got 3 races in Miami, Austin, and in Vegas. That's more than any other country. And look at the TV numbers, up about 30%, a little more than 1 million viewers, even though it's still well behind the nearly 17 million people that watch the NFL. Our in-house F1 expert, Sahil Kapoor, is joining us now. Let me just dispense with this. You cover Capitol Hill. This is not a Hill-related story, but you're obsessed with F1. You've been watching since you were 9 years old. I have to say, it's not the NFL, right? As much as the F1 might be growing in popularity, it's not where, like, the MLB or, like, big league football is, but it is still a big deal, in part because of this Netflix doc that came out, Drive to Survive, right?
That's right. The American dream is finally becoming a reality for Formula One, and it's in large part because of this Netflix documentary, Drive to Survive. It has pulled back the curtain on the sport. It's showed us that these are not just robots in race suits. You know, it's taken us to the inner sanctum of these drivers, the dramas and the personalities, the glory and the pain. And it's no coincidence that the fan base in the U.S. has risen over the 4 years since Drive to Survive first came out. Let's put up some numbers on the screen here that show this. You see it there, 440,000 attendees for the F1 race in Austin last year. I was one of them, by the way, the previous year. 2.5 million viewers for that Miami race that debuted last year for the first time on ABC. Now, the big storylines this season, Hallie, for Formula One, Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion, can he make it 3 in a row? He's driving so well this season, I'm not sure anyone's going to be able to stop him. Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, they had a spectacular start last season, and then they imploded along the way and finally replaced their team principal. They're going to want to do better. Then there's Lewis Hamilton. What's next for him? The 7-time world champion, recognizable to a lot of Americans, and he's much more than just a 7-time world champion. He's a fashion mogul. He's a political activist. He's even a part owner of the Denver Broncos, even though he's British, and football means something very different to them. Can Hamilton compete for an 8th world championship? Or could this be the twilight of his F1 career? It'll be an exciting season.
Do I love you so much? Because I didn't understand maybe 6 words that you said in the last 90 seconds. I'm sure somebody out there did, but I think it speaks to the idea that, like, it is growing in popularity. The new season starts Sunday, and there is a link, candidly, to your day job, because bigger F1 business in the U.S. means bigger F1 business for economies of states and cities that are hosting these places, like in Nevada. These races, I should say.
Exactly. And you know it's buzzy when national politicians are touting F1 in their states.
Yeah. Are they?
They are. And one of the big additions to this year's calendar is a new Grand Prix in Las Vegas. I spoke to Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, who's very excited about that race in Vegas. Let's play what she told me.
Not only is it exciting for Formula One fans, it's exciting for Las Vegas and Nevadans. It's going to be just so beneficial to our community, our economy, and it continues to show really world-class Las Vegas and what we have to offer, and I'm very excited.
Now, this is going to be epic to watch these Formula One cars zip down that Las Vegas straight, which I've walked many times. I know you have too, under the lights of the city at 200 miles an hour.
I got it. Your enthusiasm is infectious. I had no... Sahil, are we going to become F1 fans together?
Check out the sport.
You've been watching since you were 9.
Correct.
Obsessed. Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much. It's great to see you. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, Creed 3, John Wick Chapter 4, Scream 6, they are all out this month in what is a make-or-break month, potentially, and a month that could make history at theaters. We'll talk about it in a second. Right now, we're hitting what looks like the biggest month for movies since before the pandemic started, meaning there are big stakes for the studios making these films and the actual movie theaters they're playing in. Look at this. Just look. Creed 3, Scream 6, John Wick Chapter 4, the next Dungeons and Dragons, all of them are coming out this month, and some of them could end up breaking franchise box office records. Fandango's Eric Davis is joining us now. Okay, Eric, so we laid out all these movies coming up in March. Tons of hype around some of them, especially obviously the big ones here. But what's so interesting to me is like the stakes from a business perspective for the studios, for the theaters here. Talk us through it.
Yeah, I mean, at Fandango, we're calling this March movie madness. That's how stacked this month is. We're actually rewarding people who commit to all of these movies. But this is significant, Hallie. I mean, we haven't seen a month like this since the before time, since pre-COVID. I really feel like we haven't seen a month like this ever. Definitely the biggest March that we've seen on record. And so far, that first movie, Creed 3, is on pace to break records for that franchise. So Hollywood is off to a good start with this month, but there's a lot, you know, and every week, like Creed 3 can only be in IMAX theaters for 1 week because of all of these films. And so we'll see how they perform, but, you know, so far, so good.
That's super interesting. That's a good point. And I think about, too, it's not just movies, it's TV shows, too. You've got a bunch of them back this month. Succession, Yellow Jackets, Ted Lasso, which is the rare TV show that I do actually watch, and I'm looking forward to having back on TV.
Yeah, a lot of TV shows, too. So, I mean, I think this is one of the biggest months in entertainment that we've seen. I'm a big Mandalorian fan, and so I've been watching the Star Wars. And, you know, it's interesting. I think people are going to, you know, have to decide what to go see. Do we stay home and watch TV? Do we go out to the theater? And even amongst all of those big films, there are some smaller films like Champions, which I love, or 1001, which won the Sundance Film Festival. So there's just so much out there, and I think moviegoers are happy that finally there's a ton of options and a ton coming out and new releases every single week.
I'm just so struck by the way that you categorize it as perhaps among the most significant months in entertainment like ever, right? Or at least in sort of the modern era here. What that tells me, though, is that there's so much riding on this. And from the business side of things, they really can't afford for this to be a bust. They need this boom month to actually be a boom.
Yeah, I think you want to see a good month, especially going into that summer movie season, which we have a June, a July, and even an August that is pretty stacked, too. And so this month is going to tell us a lot about what that summer movie season is going to look like, because Hollywood is going to want that to be one of the biggest summer movie seasons that we've seen on record.
Eric Davis from Fandango. Eric, it's always good to see you. Enjoy your binging and your watching and all of it this weekend. I'm sure you will. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And enjoy your binging and your watching and whatever else you're doing this weekend, whether it's your taxes or something more fun. We'll have more for you here on Monday. It's so good to be with you. I will see you then, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.